Welcome to the July meeting of the Strategy and Policy Committee. Great to have you all here. Thank you for coming along, and a warm welcome to you. We'll kick off with our opening karakia, which I think Julian is lined up to offer for us. Thank you.
Morena koutou, he karakia timitanga. E oha ki runga ki a ranganui, e oha ki raro ki a papatuanuku, turakina na mea kino ki te pai atea, uia mai o koro ai aroha, he taonga mamatu ki puta ki te whai ao, ki te ao marama, haumi e, hui e, taiki e. Kia ora tātou.
Kia ora. Apologies. We have apologies from the Deputy Mayor Helen Craig and Councillor Peter Oscombe. Do we know of any other apologies? Because we're missing a few.
Lateness apology from Councillor Rob Vincent.
Okay, so that's a lateness apology from Councillor Rob. But I don't actually. I'll just check my. Oh, Charlie apology. Yes, we've got an apology from Councillor Charlie as well. So I'll put those apologies. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Ross. Any discussion? All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against, carried. Thank you. Any declarations of interest in relation to items of business on our agenda today? No. Cool. We've got a resolution to accept some additional information, and that additional information relates to anything? It's on the run sheet, but maybe there isn't something.
The reform update is with item 5.1, local water done well.
Okay, so it's in relation to the water reform update.
And the second one, item 5.3, with regard to the legislation and consultation update. It's up there.
So two items, one to do with the water reform and the other is for the legislation update submissions to bills outstanding. So we'll move those that they be...
well, can I just ask a question on that?
Yep, just let me finish. That the following information is tabled with those items. Yes, so we're tabling that information. Charlotte, you have a question?
Yeah, where is the additional information? Is it in the agenda?
It's in diligent and teams.
Thank you.
Yes.
Okay, so if you haven't had the opportunity to look at it, we can just pause when we get to those items. Welcome, Philippa. So I'm going to move that additional information be tabled. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Josh. Any discussion? No. All those in favour, please say aye. Against, carried. Confirmation of the minutes. We've got two lots of minutes there that we'll put together of the 10th of April and 30th of April. That those minutes be accepted by the meeting as a true record of what went on. I'm sorry? Oh, I forgot, but that's all right. We can do that. We'll finish this bit and go back to the waiata. Those minutes. Are there any changes to the minutes? Is everybody good with those? Right, we'll put that as a resolution. Do we have a seconder? Thank you, Glenda. All those in favour, please say aye. Against, carried. Waiata. Better late than never, especially for our songbirds. He hore, he karoria, magarongo ki te wenua, wakaro, paie, ki ngā tangata katoa. Aki ake, aki ake, amine. Te atua, te peringa, toku oranga, toku oranga. Gorgeous. Beautiful, folks. Quite made my morning. All right, moving on to our reports. Item 5.1, local water done well. Welcome, Catherine.
Morena, everybody. The committee sometime back asked for regular updates on the reform of the water services under the new government's local water done well policy. And this report is a update on both the policy and legislation changes that have been coming through, and also with our work to appraise our options in the future under that policy, so that Council has the information it needs to make sort of informed decisions in the future. There's a few key points that I will make up front, and then, Chair, with your permission, I will take you through the sort of additional information. I think that probably summarises and frames things quite well, and then very happy to take any questions. I think the key points are that change is most definitely still happening in the kind of policy space and the legislative space around how we deliver our 3 water services, and that for staff that means they're still operating in a context of some uncertainty, and it's just really important to acknowledge that up front. The government is making new rules about investment and quality standards that mean how we deliver water services will have to change, but we have some choices about how we shape that change. And the government is also driving a quite tight time frame for those changes, and that change will have to come soon. So the legislation that is currently before the House and had its second reading commence last Thursday will pass in the next week or two, I think. And that will start the timeline of a 12-month period in which we have to develop a thing called a water services delivery plan. And decisions about how we want to approach that will need to happen in the next few months. It is fair to say that the new rules mean that whatever we do, whether we go it alone or join up with some of our neighbours, and we'll come on to that, the cost of delivering services is going to go up in some way for the end user. And so our options appraisal work, as we set out, but just to summarise, shows that, excuse me, whatever we do will be more expensive than the current year 10 projection in our LTP. And the regional options are marginally cheaper, but those financial differences are relatively small, which means that any decision of how we proceed will probably want to take into account other sort of strategic considerations. Legislation has moved pretty quickly since this report to committee was drafted. As I said, the legislation was introduced on the 30th of May. Submissions to Select Committee closed 2 weeks later, and the detail of our submission is captured elsewhere on your agenda. And the committee reported back on the 18th of July, and this report is written just before that report comes back.
Excuse me, Catherine, you're welcome to refer to our submission. We'll take questions of the submission on the waters in this item rather than in the legislative item, so you're welcome to refer to that.
There, as I said, the bill has its second reading at the moment. It is on the order paper for today, although it's third after a couple of quite meaty and substantive items, so I think it will trundle through in the next few weeks. It's crucial to say as well there will actually be a third bill at the end of this year that they're planning to pass by June next year, but have said that the policy announcements around that, and there's some quite important bits in that which we'll come on to, the policy announcements about that will come after this bill has passed, so we should have some more information about that in the next few weeks or in September. So I will take you through the additional information that we circulated, because as I said, this reflected the marginal changes that came through the Select Committee report back. There wasn't anything too substantial, but there was a few points that are important. And those that were changes, interestingly, were more around tightening and increasing the powers of the Minister or the Secretary rather than reducing them. So I think that's quite an important piece of mood music to the reform. So the key points in terms of the features of the bill are that it requires all councils across the country to produce this thing called a water services delivery plan within 12 months. and it is then submitted to government for either acceptance or amendment. And if we have to amend it, then there are sort of requirements of how quickly we have to amend it and things like that. The bill as drafted is very clearly encouraging or incentivising councils to join up in some way. There are streamlined consultation processes if you are joining up, and a few other things that have been indicated around the new financial models that are coming forward in the third bill that are very much available to people who have joined with their neighbours. This bill also legislated for the arrangements relating to water care that were announced in April. And while those aren't directly applicable to our situation, there's some quite clear signals about what the fully financially separated model of water services CCO might look like, and what it might mean for sort of council oversight and governance and involvement in the day-to-day running of those businesses. The bill introduces this thing called a water services CCO, which is essentially a council-controlled organisation, but it is a council-controlled organisation that delivers water services. And that just relates to the type of business that the CCO does. It doesn't talk about its financial features, and those sort of financially separate models of business are signalled to come forward in the third bill with those policy announcements in August, September. The bill also includes some provisions that relate to the appointment of a Crown facilitator and a Crown water services technical expert, and I will come on to those. And it made, one of the things that the committee made a change in was made very explicit that the costs of the new economic regulator, which will be the Commerce Commission, will be recovered from people who deliver those water services, so i.e. councils or water services CCOs or some other form of joint arrangement. So that wasn't wholly surprising. It's been signalled in the policy for a while. It's the same model for many other regulators, but it is now explicit in the bill that they have levy-making powers to recover those costs. So that is one of those new costs that we will bear in the future that sort of pushes up the cost of delivery. There was also those streamlined consultation processes, as I said, has sort of been widened out from just if you're proposing to establish a CCO to also any kind of joint arrangement under the Local Government Act. So I'm just going to set out a little bit about what has to be in a water services delivery plan. This is a one-off plan. That was already in the bill, and they've doubled down on it in the committee report, and been very clear that it's just the once we will have to do this. And we have to show how we'll meet both the current and anticipated future regulatory standards in a financially sustainable way, and also meet drinking water quality standards and support our housing growth and urban development objectives as a territorial authority. Anticipated future standards seems a little bit wide and a little bit like having your cake and eating it too. In fairness, I think it is because a number of those regulatory pieces have been signalled already, and it's about us being clear of how we will meet those, not just sort of saying, well, they're not there yet. They're saying, you know roughly what's coming, so plan for it, as opposed to just planning for what is the here and now. It has to cover between 10 and 30 years, so along with many councils, we had suggested that it should be a plan for 30. They have had to set the standard at the kind of minimum that all councils across the country can meet, and there are some councils who will struggle to meet a 10-year time frame, and they don't want to make it too challenging. If we choose to, we can do one for 30 years, and I think there's a lot of benefit in taking that longer term view. We have to set out what kind of arrangement we're going to use to deliver those water services, so whether that's keeping it in-house or joining up, whether it's a CCO or a joint arrangement or some form of other mechanism. And And one of the changes that got made through Select Committee was that we can now amend and resubmit a plan that has been accepted by the Secretary if it substantially changes. So essentially what that means in terms of sequencing is if we have developed a plan, consulted on a plan, submitted a plan, had it accepted, and then as we get into the implementation phase, for some reason the wheels fall off and we need to change our plans, we've got a 6-month window in which we can go back and make that amendment. But that's not a lot of time, so it's still a fairly tight piece. The absolutely crucial thing that changed as through Select Committee is that we must have an implementation plan now in that delivery plan. There was never a requirement for that as drafted, and this has some pretty big implications. It must include the process by which we will deliver the proposed model or arrangements. It must include a commitment to give effect to those arrangements. And it must set out the timeframes and milestones. And then the Minister has been given powers to monitor our progress against that. And crucially, a Crown facilitator can be appointed if we have failed to implement it. So I doubt we were thinking this, because we don't think that way, but any council that is thinking they can write this and put it in a drawer and forget about it, it's not going to work that way. The joint water service delivery plans are also enabled. So if one or two or more local authorities think that they might want to deliver services together in the future, you can prepare a joint plan rather than both producing individual ones, or however many of you. So we don't have to have fully made that decision. It is a sort of decision in principle that we think this is the right direction of travel and we want to keep moving through it. But it sets a direction. This is the bit where it gets a little bit complicated around 2 or 3 waters. The plan itself has to cover all of the waters for all of the people who are taking part in that joint plan. But you have an option as to whether or not you put 2 waters into the joint arrangement or 3, and you can have a different combination. So if you've got 3 councils doing a joint plan, 2 of them can say, we're going to keep doing our stormwater by ourselves, but we'll put 2 waters into the joint arrangement, and the other one might say, we'll do all 3 waters together jointly, and that's that. But the plan has to describe what everyone's doing. And it can include information about the ownership structure and the governance structure and control and financial rights of each territorial authority, but it doesn't have to. So that can be part of the implementation phase if needs be. A little bit there about the Crown facilitator and water services specialists. These are 2 things that the bill gives the power to the Minister to make these 2 types of appointments. In particular, a Crown facilitator can be appointed if they think we are unlikely to submit a plan, haven't submitted one, or have failed to amend one or to implement it. And likewise, the water services specialist is an even more technical role, but has some powers around directing a territorial authority to adopt a specific plan, having essentially prepared it for the territorial authority. So I don't think we will end up in a situation where this is something that we're facing, because I think we've been preparing for this well. But I think it's again a signal of the kind of pretty robust powers and approach that the government is taking. They're not going to wait for territorial authorities to have not done it. They're going to intervene much earlier on in the process, I think. A very quick word about engagement. The bill doesn't set out any new requirements around engagement or consultation, but it does make really clear that we have to consult in line with the Local Government Act and our own significance and engagement policy. As I said, it introduces these new streamlined arrangements for anything that's looking at joining up, which essentially mean you can consider less options, both rather than all the options. You can set out just the status quo and the preference, and you can do one set of consultation across all the people who are joining up rather than lots of individual consultations. In terms of the financial sustainability and ring fencing, this is the absolutely crucial point. So we have to demonstrate in our water services delivery plan that we will be able to deliver water services in a financially sustainable way. We have to be able to demonstrate that we can do that by the 30th of June 2028, which I think is the end of year 3 of the long-term plan. It might be the end of year 4. And financial sustainability is defined as that our revenue is sufficient to make long-term investment, and that we have the financial ability to meet all the regulatory standards and requirements. And also, we must explain how our revenue and delivery of water services is separated from the territorial authorities' other functions and activities. We already in our financial statements do ring fence our revenue, and we do ring fence our expenditure, and we can very clearly point to those two things. What we don't do at the moment, because we don't have to, but this bill as drafted seems to suggest that we would have to, is that we borrow against all of council's income and spend more on water from borrowing than if we just borrowed against council's income for water. And once you can only borrow against council's income for water, the amount we can borrow is reduced. And that's got some pretty big implications for what we're able to do in the future. It would either mean one of 3 things. Either the borrowing caps would have to be increased, and I do wonder if the government is exploring some of that in the new financial models, or it would mean that we'd have to increase our revenue from water so that we could borrow more, essentially, because you borrow against the amount of income you've got, or it would mean that we'd have to scale back what we were spending, which essentially means reducing projects and investment or reducing levels of service. And we know from the long-term plan consultation there was a very clear signal from our community that investment in core infrastructure like that was something that people wanted to see. We did seek clarification of this from the Select Committee, and the Select Committee report is fairly silent on it, along with a bunch of other questions about water service delivery plans. They were pretty clear that the DIA guidance was expected to sort of cover all of those technical questions. So my sense is that there is perhaps a small chance that that will change, but I think that is probably the direction of travel. I think, yes, that's my last one on that. I will talk to the remainder of the paper. That's the really big one that we've then fed into the modelling that we have done when we've looked at our options. So we've looked at 3 options broadly. One is going it alone. The other is we've spoken with our neighbours in Taranaki at a very high level. And the third is that we have been doing a fairly detailed piece of appraisal work with our neighbours in the Manawatu Wanganui region. In terms of going it alone, we've modelled what that would look like under these new rules. And I think, as I say in the paper, we think it would mean a jump of at least $200 to $300 per year for water charges before the end of June 28 compared to the current LTP projections. So it's really important to understand that even if we go it alone, it won't look exactly the same as what we've currently planned for in our long-term plans. We've modelled and included in that cost the cost of the new Commerce Commission. We've made some sort of assumptions about what that is likely to cost. What we haven't modelled is whether or not the new Commerce Commission's investment rules would have any other implications for some of how we fund asset renewals and depreciation, because we just don't have certainty on that yet, but we will be keeping a close eye on that. We've also, as I said, we've been working on a fairly extensive piece of work with our neighbours in the Manawatu Wanganui region for the last sort of 6 months. That piece of work is nearing an end and has been reported to the mayoral forum and back to this committee at various points. That is also coming out as more expensive to our long-term plan year 10 figure, but with a couple of key variations. So one of the first things that we looked at, because we knew it was a challenge, was the impact of Palmerston North's wastewater treatment plant being included or not included in that joint arrangement. And that came out with a figure of about $20 per connection is the difference between that being included or not. So it's a very marginal difference, and we think that if you are joining up, there are many strategic benefits to sort of keeping everything together. So the other thing that we looked at was we then looked at a kind of all 7 of us in, and then the kind of scenario testing of what if one or more of us dropped out. And so there's some sort of differences in the cost per connection, per user that depend on the combination of people that's in or out. But the difference between each of those is quite marginal. It's a very small range for a kind of year 10 projection. So it's marginally cheaper, as I say, all of them to going it alone, but the other reasons are going to come into play in terms of why you would join or not. And then, as I said, we've spoken with our neighbours in Taranaki. We looked at the modelling at a very high level. We haven't gone into as much detail on that one. And at that stage, there was no financially compelling reason to sort of go with them rather than the Manawatu Wanganui. So we've parked that conversation. They are going through a similar exercise with their regional neighbours, and we're both expecting to conclude that work at about the same time. So there is an option to revisit that conversation if either of us wants to, but at the moment it is parked. That is probably a whistle-stop tour of local water done well. I'm really happy to take any other questions on the paper.
Thanks, Catherine. Right, Josh, you've got a question.
I do. I'm just trying to remember it. Yeah, okay, good. So the ring-fenced finances and the cap on it that would exist under the status quo, because of only being able to borrow against that ring-fence revenue, would it still be 280%?
I'm not sure at the moment. So the signals from government are that something around that will change.
Okay.
So water cares, and there's a question, I think, of what drives the change. So if you are fully financially separated, then your borrowing is in no way linked to councils, and your cap might be able to go up. So water cares cap, the credit rating agencies are understood to have sort of said you could borrow up to 900%. Watercare's board is choosing to cap it at 500%.
Okay.
You can sort of see how that works. In the bits in the middle, I do wonder if the new financially separate tools that they're signalling might be a higher cap for water borrowing than the 280, even if you're still borrowing from the LGFA, but we can't tell.
Okay.
Yeah.
So just assuming that it stays around, let's say 300%, how close are we at the moment to being at that cap?
We would be over it in the first couple of
Right.
years. I think
Okay.
we're at about 350 some years. I'd need to double check, but
sure.
yeah, it's higher.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. That's all.
Andrew.
Yeah, look, thank you, Catherine. Very, very good presentation, so thank you. I've got a bundle of questions here, so I'll get through them as quickly as I can. Some councils won't be able to demonstrate financial sustainability, I assume. So, with those councils needing a joint arrangement the most, how will this work for them? My reason for that is that you don't really want to team up with someone who is financially, where the financial model doesn't work for you, if that makes sense.
So I think the individual modelling that we've been doing as a 7 councils, each council's been responsible for their own, and I haven't seen all of them yet. What I would say is that different councils are in different positions on a bunch of different indicators. So that asset and renewal figure that I mentioned, we are probably one of the weaker of the 7. So our percentage of how much we fund our renewals isn't as high as, say, Palmerston North's, or even Tararua's. Tararua's is very, very high. And yet, so we know about Palmerston North's wastewater treatment plant. Tararua has a lot of challenges around a small dispersed population. So I think it's that thing of swings and roundabouts. I think overall, all 7 of us are in reasonably good shape. So I don't know I don't think any of us would fall into that completely unfinancially sustainable, because we've all got some benefits and some challenges that we bring to the table.
So different maturities for different types of water services. Okay.
And different challenges and different investment decisions.
Okay,
over time.
so it rides on to the second question. Is there any incentive for councils who can demonstrate financial sustainability to form joint arrangements? So in other words, we would help others potentially with a joint arrangement to find efficiencies. But you probably answered that in that first question.
Largely, I think there is the government is certainly not offering any financial incentive at the moment to help neighbours who are struggling, and I'm not really confident that would change. I think the other benefits are the ones that we sort of set out in that report around kind of catchment management in particular, being able to manage the whole of the water catchment for the awa and the Te Awa Tupua obligations that come with that, to me and to many is a fairly significant advantage. And there is also the kind of political clout that comes with being a bigger grouping who are aligned on key issues of investment when speaking to local government and even regional regulators. I think there's also the sort of the benefits that come with scale, not in a sort of an automatic, that's a good thing, it must bring savings, but just the sort of the resilience that comes with having more people to draw on, more expertise, and also the sort of streamlining and simplification in the same way that if you join up you get to do consultation once, but you also into the future, if you're joined up, you do one set of procurement, one set of design, one set of everything, whereas at the moment the regional assessment, one little thing that sticks with me is there's 500 plus waters related contracts across the Manawatu Wanganui region. A lot of those must duplicate themselves because we're doing them 7 times, so instinctively it feels like there's some efficiencies to be had there in the right sense of the word.
Okay. So I've got just a couple more, if that's okay.
Keep going.
The other question is around the financial sustainability model overall. The options for the debt cap, if you like, for just water alone, is so to get around that is to increase the debt cap, or to find revenue opportunities. So does that? I'm going to sort of call the elephant out, if you like. Does that
Poke
open?
the bear.
What's that?
Poke the bear.
Poke the bear, yeah. Does that invite a conversation around water metering?
I think it does, yeah. Yep, absolutely. And I think there's an appetite for that. Well, no, let me rephrase that. That discussion will be driven by any number of factors, but I think that is a really crucial one, is that the metering conversation and again our talking of maturity in different stages, there is a variety of metering situations across the region as well. No one is at full metering, but you could move towards that quite quickly. But the experience of where people have recently introduced metering, they've seen their usage drop off. And there are benefits not just in terms of the sort of direct line between what the user uses and what the user pays, but there's less water consumption, which actually means that you don't have to build your pipes as big. Your planning becomes different. You've got better information with which to plan your infrastructure need and your infrastructure investment. And you're also able to better monitor things like leakage, so your system overall becomes more effective for the same amount of money.
Well answered. I was going to preface that by saying that there are some benefits. Don't be scared of water metering. But the final question I've got is around, I was actually writing it, going through this and looking, looks like the increased compliance, and indeed in point 28 you actually address that. So I would assume that there'll be some mitigation against compliance costs through joint arrangements?
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks, Andrew. Rob?
Thank you. My apologies for not being here earlier, but I have read it pretty thoroughly. When C4LD put a proposition forward, they were talking about the establishment of a funding agency. Has there been any talk at a government level about the creation of this funding agency?
None.
No.
No. The key thing through all of this is that there is no money or even support in kind for councils to do this mahi.
Okay. And would it be fair to say that if we had a default position, our default position is go it alone unless we can be convinced otherwise, which I think is a fairly key assumption to make. And have you got a comment about that?
I mean, I think it is for councillors to set our default position. If I'm honest, the very clear direction to me has been that we are appraising our options, all of them openly and on the table. I think the thing for me that has been surprising through this work is that our understanding of our own position, where we've made some good investment decisions in the past, we have increased our funding through the long-term plan process, we have the benefits of a kind of good, effective team. We have the benefits of geography as well. We've got sort of one big scheme for a big urban population and then 2 or 3 smaller schemes, but we've not got sort of 15 across a really diverse geography. A lot of those things would instinctively say it's going to remain cheaper to go it alone. And I think the thing that's been surprising for me is that the numbers are just ever so slightly the other way. And then, as I say, it's sort of a number of other factors affect instinctively which way you want to go. There's this sort of your risk appetite, your sense of whether there's value and strength in numbers, or whether there is the opportunity for it to dilute local voice and a sense of power and control. And so there's no, for me as an officer, there's no sort of single default position. I think that is very much the direction of councillors to give.
Just one final question, if I may. It's gone out of my mind now. Forget it.
We can come back to you, Rob. Charlotte.
Thank you. So you spoke about sort of thinking about this from a whole catchment perspective. Has there and I have there has been this talk about talking with other neighbours. Have you entered any discussions, or do you plan to enter any discussions with our Ruapehu neighbours?
So Ruapehu are part, obviously, of the Manawatu Wanganui whole region, and the options appraisal work has looked at one of those sort of sub-regional options being if you sort of split us in half,
Right.
which essentially is Ruapehu, Rangateke, Wanganui, and then the other four to the south and east. And so that is an option. I think it's fair to say that we haven't got into the nitty-gritty of the pros and cons of different sub-regional options, and I think again some of that I expect would be a conversation at the mayoral forum level of what they understand those pros and cons to be of those different options.
And do you have a time frame as to when you want these conversations to be sort of wrapped up by?
Yes. So from a purely program point of view, and assuming that the legislation passes in the next couple of weeks and that kicks off a deadline of the end of July, give or take, next year, we would like a sort of decision of the principle of which way to approach our water services delivery plan, i.e. either whether going it alone or joining up with a combination neighbours, sort of back end of September, October, because that still gives us 6 or so months to sort of do the work of developing the plan, taking it out to consultation, so formal community consultation, and then bringing it back for adoption before it's submitted. So it absolutely has to go through a council decision-making process before it is adopted and submitted. And I think it's worth remembering that sort of decisions will need to be made in that first part of the year next year.
Thank you.
So we'll just, I've got a couple of questions and we'll go to the other questions, but seeing as we're on to next steps, let's take the last first and tease that out a little bit. I'm seeing a couple of stages in the engagement with the community process, and the first is, do we go alone or not?
Yep.
For example, and then if we arrive at one of those options, then we might take it to the next stage. So the thinking about, because you've alluded to one consultation process, for example, if we were to go together, so especially thinking about that front end in terms of which way do we go, early thinking about what that might look like, because of the, if we're going to be have the legislation within the next few weeks, the modelling's going to be finished in August, which starts on Thursday. So it's kind of rolling towards us very quickly.
Yeah, I think there's probably quite a strong case to be made for saying an early conversation with our communities would be really helpful. As you say, on that sort of very high level, just we've got some really tough, complex decisions to make. Your views form a really crucial part of that decision making. It's not all of the reasons, but it's a big part of it. And having that conversation quite early, I think, sort of through late August, September, would be probably really helpful to help you with decision making. And I think in terms of how that regional work has been working, we're very much in a stage where we are working well and working collaboratively on that model, but we also understand that at the moment, until councillors make the decision of which way to go, we also sort of function independently in this phase of work. And so I think each of the 7 of us will take a different approach to those conversations with our communities, sort of if they need to happen, to what depth they need to happen, what the questions are that need to be asked for councillors around their own tables to feel confident. So that would be, I think there's a strong case for doing that sort of early, making that in principle decision, doing the work, and then going to formal consultation at the before adoption.
So should we take from that then that in the next 6 weeks or so there will be further conversations outside of this forum between us about what that engagement with our community is going to look like, because it will have needed to happen by the time, before the end of September, for example?
Yes. If that is the direction you would like to give us as officers, yes.
Okay, thank you. Any questions particularly about the engagement with community? Because I want to tease out some of the other issues in here. intuitively, I would expect that by the time you strip out overhead, you have economies of buying power. You've talked about political clout, resilience of going together. Intuitively, it says to me that we would be better off to go as a collective. At the same time, the modelling's not necessarily showing that. So I'd like to understand a little bit more about what are the variables we're using for costing the efficiencies? You know, what evidence are we looking at to support those variables? Like how much we should expect, you know, in real simple terms from our buying power by being part of a group that's, you know, about 90,000 people.
Yeah. So for the work we've done in the regional work, what we've modelled is 3 scenarios based on a kind of very conservative view, a midpoint and an optimistic view. And we've looked at both the efficiencies that you get from operating expenditure, so sort of your running costs, and then also your capital expenditure. We've looked at those as a sort of a desktop exercise of percentages, but those have been baselined against a number of examples of other similar types of transitions of government, local government bodies coming together. We've looked at the Hawke's Bay model, Waikato, the Auckland transition, which is one of the really big ones of forming the Auckland Super Council. So we baselined those. We also looked at the costs in a similar sort of way, and we did one thing in particular with the costs that we looked at was if you applied a percentage, the percentages were quite low to begin with and left you with a sort of under-egged budget. And so we actually lifted those percentages up because we'd be coming straight back to you to say we got that wrong. So we sense checked that quite strongly. The other thing that we did with the efficiency savings, and we are wondering if we've been too prudent here, but one of the big criticisms around the original models under the former government was that the optimism was too high in terms of the efficiency savings. And they were projecting efficiency savings at 20%. Our most optimistic situation, I think, is 16. So we really have been quite prudent in our efficiency modelling so as not to overpromise and underdeliver. But I think as you get down into it, the things like buying power and scale begin to flow through.
Okay. I would describe that as conservative rather than prudent, but your point is well made. So you've talked to us about that going it alone is already more expensive than the 10-year plan.
Mm-hmm.
I would imagine that's in the out years of the 10-year plan because the 10-year plan's only, the ink on it's only just dried.
Yeah. So there's 2 things happening. Yes, for all of the modelling, we've looked out to year 10 to compare, and that's where the sort of lines are. For the going it alone, the impact is actually felt in that first 3 years of sort of years 2 to 4 of the plan because of that requirement to be financially sustainable by 30th of June 28. So we've got to make changes to what we do in the very near future in order to be sustainable as we anticipate the rules specifying.
Does that mean bringing capital expenditure forward? Is that the guts of it?
No, it's the opposite. It's increasing our income from water so that we can keep borrowing against it as planned. So we would either be cutting capital expenditure in those first couple of years or deferring it further out or increasing cost to end users to be able to fund the program as we're currently envisaging it.
That's just seeded another question. So what modelling are we doing in terms of what the rest of council looks like without the 3 waters?
Yep, so we have taken a look at that, and the sort of the stranded overhead has an impact, and the numbers have all gone out of my head, sorry. I think it equates to about $100 per ratepayer if you sort of model it, it's about 20% of our overheads cost.
So the cost of doing water goes up 200, and we still hold 100 back at the rest of our operations.
Yep.
All right, thank you. In one of your slides, going back a bit, you talked about what was in and out in terms of, I think, the delivery plans and the implementation plans. It was one of the later slides, and I think it talked about governance.
Yeah.
And other things were out. Well, I was thinking, what's in?
So that's for a joint water service delivery plan. So everything else is in that is in a going it alone water services delivery plan. And then there are additional things around the type of arrangement and the implementation plan and the waters or not. And then that optionality around setting out those things. I think a lot of joint plans will probably say at least something about those things, because actually it will be important to start thinking about them. They're almost the hardest bits, if I'm completely honest. So the more you can think about those and kind of get those right early on, the rest of it flows through. And it's just occurred to me, I've put two things together to the financial sustainability point and the point about instinctively which way would we go. It's that ring fencing rule that has really fundamentally changed the instinctive, we'd probably rather go it alone. It's that ring fencing requirement that changes the rules quite substantially for councils like us.
And undermines that concept of going alone might be best.
Yeah.
Is, I guess, what you're suggesting. All right. Thank you. Good. Jenny.
Thank you. There's a lot to think about, isn't there? Some potentially easier questions. Stormwater, that's still part of it, is it not?
It is. So a water service delivery plan has to say how we will deal with stormwater. The optionality is whether we do that by ourselves or do that jointly inside a joint plan.
So that's far more difficult to plan for, isn't it?
Yeah, my instinct would be that if we were to enter a joint plan, you take all three waters, because I think the synergies, the catchments, the benefits of being joint come with the three waters being joint.
Thank you. And another sort of easier question. My understanding of CCOs is that a council needs to have more than a 50% ownership. If we're a collective CCO, a regional sort of CCO, then that must mean councils, not council.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Rob.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, so the model you talked about quantums of money, required at certain times. But what about the charging model? Now, how does this operate? Or how is it talked about to operate? Or are there options? Because you could either have a sort of a company set up like your Water Cares and those sorts of things that bill the consumer, or they pay their rates through the Wanganui District Council and we pay them to some other body. And then you've also got all the different ways of charging for water and things that vary and things. So what discussions go on about that type of?
Quite a lot, but all in the hypothetical stage at the moment. So there's not a lot of clarity on that from government. There's been no talk about the powers to rate or the powers to recover if you're a water services CCO. So that will need to come through in the policy announcements in August in that final piece of legislation. To my mind, some of that is mechanics in terms of once you've made a decision, that's the mechanics of how you do those things, and you design to meet those requirements. In terms of charging regimes and charging approaches, again, haven't got into the detail of of what that would look like. But I think it's one of the really big opportunities for streamlining if we join up. So at the moment, across all 7 of us, it's amazing how 7 councils who are tasked with doing basically the same things within the same set of rules can do things quite differently. But there's a difference in approach of charging based on SUIP versus charging based on land value versus capital value, etc. Some of us are not charging any development contributions at all. Some of us are. Some of us are charging trade waste to 100 people. Some of us are charging trade waste to 3. There's a whole bunch of harmonisation or change that we could make and explore in those charging structures and metering, as we've already talked about, that again, I think means the devil will be in the detail of where we land. But again, coming back to what are the efficiencies, what are the savings, it doesn't necessarily all rest in either increasing price or straight out efficiency. There's sort of benefits from having more consistency in that approach. So
so for elected member, just the consumer is a key consideration for us as elected members, and the way they are charged and the way they are affected. What we're talking about here with combining in and what have you, that's all very well, but that's, as far as the consumer's concerned, it'll be how they're charged and the fairness of that compared to others and everything like that.
Thanks, Rob. Julian.
Great presentation, Catherine. And coming back to the Crown Facilitator, he has the oversight to control or accept or deny Council's waste development plan. Does the facilitator then have the power to dismiss a council?
No. It's nowhere near as strong as that. It is
got
limited and bound to just that delivery plan.
Right.
Yep.
Thank you.
Be fairly significant powers, though.
Yes.
If you get a commissioner appointed.
Yeah.
All right. Do you want to just recap in terms of take-home messages,
Yep.
Catherine?
So I think to recap, the government is changing the rules. The government is changing the rules about how we will do water services delivery in the future, and we've got choices to make, but they are quite tough choices, because all of those rule changes mean that it's going to cost us more in the future. And so I think the earlier we are directed to have a conversation with our community about that at a really high level, but just sort of understanding those key issues is the better.
Okay, thank you. And we'll be having some collective conversation about what happens and when in the next couple of weeks. Definitely by the middle of August, we need to have landed somewhere about what that engagement's going to look like.
Yep.
All right, thank you. I'm going to put the recommendation that the Strategy and Policy Committee receive the report, Local Water Well Done Reform Update. Do I have a seconder? Philippa, would you like to second that?
Yes.
Did you want to speak to that?
Yes. Yes, thank you. Thank you, Catherine. It's what a huge issue. What a huge piece of work. I read this well last night and have written a lot of notes and been thinking a lot about it. And although got a very open mind, I guess, and I've just kind of read actually the National Government's policy statement prior to the election, and really they're sticking to what they said. And there's a few things there, like in the fact that that there's no incentives being offered. The only incentive I can see they're trying to kind of quietly in some ways offer is that they talk about National's plan supports greater access to councils for long-term borrowing, which is an appropriate way to fund long-life water infrastructure, and one way to improve access to borrowing will be for neighbouring councils to form regional council-controlled organisations, etc., etc. But really it goes on to saying, it talks about that this can help our finances by kind of going together, because we have greater power to borrow more money, etc. I guess there's a whole lot of stuff in this, but you know, the comment, is it strength in numbers? If we're looking at either doing it alone or going regionally or whatever, is it strength in numbers? Is that the way forward, or is it actually going to dilute local control? And although there's work to be done and got a very open mind, the best evidence, or the best where I'm sitting at the moment is you know, if you look at Health New Zealand, Te Whatu Ora, I mean, I sat on a health board for 18 years, and I always said it wasn't the 13 people or so sitting around 20 district health boards in New Zealand. It wasn't that we were the smartest people in the world and made all the great differences, but we were the only block and the only voice between the minister and the ministry and the people. And when we got fired overnight by the previous minister, Andrew Little, I took it pretty well. I thought, oh well. Even at that stage, on a DHB, we couldn't even regionally talk to each other through IT. Our IT systems in First World Health weren't able to talk to each other. Primary and secondary care couldn't really talk to each other. So I was like, well, I haven't managed to sort this out in 18 years. So, you know, good on them, good on the government looking to form one body, and hopefully they can sort it out. What I will say is we've had some strong calls locally for things like retaining obstetrics, having our children born here, and secondary service obstetrics, being able to look after our children, you know, our babies and our children, to obstetrics and paediatrics in particular. I think the time that people like Kate and Jenny and I sat on those boards, and Josh, we really made a difference for this community. Because if you can't look after your young people here, you're not going to bring young families here, and etc. So I really, but then I go on, and I'm talking health and we're talking water, but that, but you know, look at Health New Zealand, look at Te Whatu Ora, look what's happening. It's a damn mess. It's, you know, the health system has never been under more pressure. There's no answers, and now we've got a commissioner running health in New Zealand. And so would basically, you know, I'm sitting on the side of, at this stage, we have invested very well in our three waters. It's been a hard journey. We've had to build 2 wastewater treatment plants, and other projects have suffered because of that. Other things we've had to delay in that, but we've invested pretty well, and we're investing well in the future. And it will take me a lot to be convinced that keeping doing what we're doing alone is actually best for our community, because we are the face, we are the block between the government and our community. Thank you.
Rob.
Thank you, Councillor Philippa. Yes, I have to say that I just feel that we have to approach this with the utmost caution, because, you know, as Councillor Philippa said, we have high quality assets. You know, we only use 11% of our aquifer. You know, that's why we don't have meters here, because there's no need for meters. Others in the region are in a totally different position. You know, and so what concerns me is creating this body, because effectively, you know, we talk about, a CCO and these various things. Effectively, we're creating another body like a regional council. It'll have to have some governance on it. And there'll have to be policies set on how they charge for their services, which will vary across the region according to the quality of assets and the various different things that need to be made up to go into this. So I talked before about our default position. I strongly believe our default position is our best position, and I believe that our best position at this point in time is to go it alone. And I'm willing to be convinced that there's a better option, but at this stage, the default position for me is go it alone. Thank you.
Andrew.
Yeah, look, thank you. Look, I want us to go back a couple of years, and the concern in our community around Three Waters was an election issue, both nationally but also locally as well. And we see it as a community, this community, Wanganui community, that we would fight against the legislation at the time that was proposed. And I want to take us to where we are today, and I believe that the concerns that were voiced by our community at that time have been allayed in this legislation. And I'd go to, I think this is a very well written paper, so thank you, Catherine, for that. And I'd go to your point 12 there, which talks about water service delivery plans, and it's got 4 points. It's got that the council plans to deliver water services in a way that is financially sustainable. There's nothing wrong with that. We need that. It's not just for tomorrow, but it's for 10 years' time, it's for 30 years' time. The second point is that meets relevant regulatory quality standards for all three networks. There is nothing wrong with that. We all want good water, and we want our water, our three waters, to be managed well. The third one is that it meets drinking water quality services. And again, that is something that we all want. And fourthly, supports territorial authorities' housing growth and urban development objectives. So if we're going to grow, we need to ensure that we can manage our three waters well. And the fourth point that's not in here, but it's in the paper here, is that we retain local ownership of water assets. And that was probably the primary concern, that we not only had ownership but also control of our water assets as well. And I think no matter whether we go it alone or whether we've got a joint model, that we would continue to retain that. That I think is really important. The other point as well is that whether we go it alone or have a joint arrangement, I want to highlight that there are 14 councils within 2 hours drive from Wanganui. And I've said this before, 14 councils, 14 chief executives, 14 CFOs, 14 planning teams, and I don't think that's sustainable. So I think actually finding ways to have a joint approach, not just with Three Waters, but how we collaborate and do things with other councils, whatever that looks like, I think invites a conversation at this stage, in addition to how we manage our water assets, but how do we collaborate with other councils across this region, and how can we be more efficient in how we deliver services for our community across the board. So thank you.
Thank you. Right, we're going to wind this up now because I can see other councillors around the table wanting to get into this conversation, and it's an important one. So thank you very much for that. Huge mihi to you, Catherine, for the work that you're doing in this space. It is a huge comfort to me to understand where we are in terms of the pack. And, you know, I think our intellectual capital and the work that we're doing around this is excellent. So thank you very much for that, and we look forward to next steps. And I'm going to hold you to that. You know, in the next couple of weeks, I expect, you know, we'll have landed about what engagement looks like with our community, and making sure that they're well informed and have a voice in what's happening. So without further ado, we'll put the recommendation that we're receiving the report. All those in favour, please say aye. Against? Carried. Thank you. Like I say, good discussion. And thank you for restraining yourselves, those of you who didn't get to wade into the conversation right now. Moving on to item 5.2, we have local alcohol policy, annual cap review. Welcome to the table, Hannah and Elise. The floor is yours.
Morena. Yes, it's LAP cap time once again. I think I've taken most of you through this already, but I'll go from the top just to make sure we're all on the same page. So the LAP is the local alcohol policy. Clause 2.1 is a cap on off licenses. There won't be more than 14. Clause 2.4 requires us to review this cap every year to ensure that it's not inconsistent with development objectives and potential in the Wanganui district. Our recommendation, as it has been previously, is that there have to date been no off licenses declined with reference to the cap. So our view is that it is not contrary to development objectives and potential in the Wanganui district. That's kind of the decision that's in front of you, whether or not to accept that recommendation. For additional context, if we did want to change the cap, it would require going through a full review process of the LAP, which is already underway. So that shouldn't influence your thinking, but it is important to bear that in mind, that the process for reviewing the LAP, including looking both at the cap and the review provisions, is already underway. And I'm happy to answer any questions about where we're up to on that so far. But I just want to be very clear that in terms of the actual decision that's in front of you, that question about is it contrary to development objectives and potential in the district, that's the key grounds that you need to make the decision on. Aside from that, I'm happy to take the report as read and answer any questions.
Thank you, Hannah. Do we have any questions? One question.
Thank you. Thanks, Hannah. Just want to go to your executive summary point 3, just for clarity for everybody. To date, no off licenses have been declined with reference to the cap. Does that mean we are still at 13 or less, or does it mean that there are a number of exceptions, in which case this doesn't necessarily tell the reality of what's happening?
I believe we're up to 17 or 18 off licenses in the district at the moment. So that's kind of the explanation for that paragraph 3, is that although the cap says no more than 14, the review provision says the cap cannot be inconsistent with development objectives and potential in the Wanganui district, and it cannot be contrary to that because there have been no licenses declined based on the cap existing. There has to date not been a situation where the district licensing committee has said we will not grant this license because it would be contrary to the cap. So it's kind of impractical to suggest that it's contrary to development objectives and potential.
Then does that make having the cap an oxymoron? I mean, we've got 13, 14, whatever that number is, because I've heard them both, but we can do what we like. So it's not actually working.
So that's one of the reasons why this is under such, this is going to be one of the main focuses for the policy review, and when this eventually gets through to being approved next year, you can expect specific recommendations around the cap and the review provision, because they've been kind of a focus of work for several years. And we'll be looking at kind of how they function, what they purport to do, what they're actually doing, whether or not it's worth keeping it, whether it's better to get rid of it, is all recommendations that we'll bring to you sometime.
So with the number of exceptions that are being made and the approvals given, if another large bottle store comes to town, does that mean that they're just...
It's possible.
It's possible, but to date the exceptions to the cap haven't been bottle stores, so they've been smaller outlets, Papeete Gin and the place across the road. There's smaller.
Boutique.
Well, yeah, boutique. That's right. But as Hannah says, none have been declined based on the cap. Therefore, you can't say that it's preventing development, but it's not successful in its overriding objective around preventing alcohol harm. So that is the focus for the full policy review, is what other options do we have?
Philippa, it's a question. Philippa, questions?
Yes, I know the difference between questions and comment. It was comment before,
I know that you're all over this issue, though, so just make sure it's a question.
2 or 3 quick questions, thank you. I think, in regard to this annual cap review, have we had any, we have not quite sure the name, an inspector. We have our own, have we had any...
Licensing inspector?
Licensing inspector. Is there any, have we gone to the licensing inspector and asked, does he support this? Have there been any other concerns raised?
We're in fairly regular dialogue because, like I said, the full policy review is underway. So I've had several conversations with him around the thing as in general. I believe I passed this report in front of him, but it's materially the same as it was last year. Not recommending a change to the cap at the moment, but bearing in mind now that the full policy is underway and we will be looking at that quite strongly.
Thank you. And similar, New Zealand Police, have we gone to them to ask if they got any concerns about our LAP and any issues they're seeing in particular that should be addressed?
For the LAP generally, yes. Not with reference to the recommendation in this paper, not with reference to the assessment of the cap, but I've submitted an OAA and received the response to an OAA for the policy development in general, and I expect that I will be speaking to them, the local officers, because there's a specific team that handles the OAA inquiries for LAPs nationally. Yep. I will also be speaking to, hopefully, the actual officers who kind of patrol around Wanganui, moving on from here, I hope, in the next few weeks.
Great.
Can I also add to that, just at Safer Wanganui, this is offered, this is a standing item, comes up most meetings, and the members of the police attend those meetings, so they're aware of what's happening in this place.
Yeah. Thank you. And lastly, but possibly the most concern is around online sales. So I think we've already submitted previously around recommending that a bill, should explicitly refer to impose controls on online sales within New Zealand, requiring delivery services to check ID on delivery, and requiring a retailer to be licensed in each district they provide alcohol, because quite simply we can have a cap here, but you can purchase your alcohol. It's from another district, basically, through a national brand that has no cap or a different cap. And so really, which we know online sales and everything, and particularly alcohol, high concern. So is the full review looking to really reduce that issue?
So you're correct. There were a few pieces of legislation that have come through in the alcohol space this year and last year. On one of them, the community participation bill we submitted in one of our submissions was that there should be more controls nationally introduced around online sales, because, like you said, you can have a license in a different district and be selling alcohol online in this district. Unfortunately, there have been no changes to the law around that, and as far as I'm aware, nobody has signalled an interest in changing the law around that. So we currently have no means by which to control this within our district. There is simply no way for us to impose any restrictions around online sales.
So possibly it's a question of even the chair, like that, and the mayor, like a conversation with Safer Wanganui, and with our MPs. Around a private member's bill, but looking at that a discussion there to see, because that it's a national issue, and there's other means to possibly address that.
We can take that to Safer Wanganui, no worries.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Rob.
Yeah, thank you. Supermarkets and dairies aren't in this cap, is that right?
That's correct.
Yeah. So how many of those are there?
So I think we're up, if you included supermarkets and grocery stores within the cap, we would sort of be up to about 27, 28. Yeah. From my understanding, that so they're explicitly exempted from the cap. They don't count as an off-license for the purposes of our local alcohol policy. From what I understand, that was the result of negotiations while we were attempting to put the existing policy in place under the old regulatory regime that allowed us to be taken to court over the provisions, which is no longer in place. We'll be looking at that as an issue of, should it stay that way? Should it change? Do we need to reorient our system to the degree that the distinction doesn't matter anymore? These are the questions that some of the questions that we're considering in the review.
Fantastic. Thank you. One last question from me, and that's, is it June 25 that we need to have completed our review?
Yes, I was just going to say to Hannah to give the timeline that we want to have it completed by then. So we want to have it completed prior to the pre-election period. So you'll see there'll be workshops and more engagement with you on this issue. over the next 6 months, and then we'll go through the formal process as well of updating the policy and going through formal consultation next year. Yeah, and you'll see in Para 17, Hannah's already given an update on the progress she's made, such as putting in that substantial OAA to police, and we've got a lot of good information back from them. So already well underway, but it is quite a long process to put this through, and it needs to follow everything, needs to follow, you know, the correct process. Yeah.
We need excellent sourced data.
Exactly.
To
Yeah, it needs to be
support our
evidence.
position.
Yeah, needs to be evidence based,
Very
as everything does. But in particular, that's why Hannah's put in that OAA to make sure we've got as much information as possible about what actually is happening on the ground in Wanganui around alcohol harm and alcohol harm related incidents. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. So would it be reasonable to assume that our first meeting 2025 would be putting this paper up for...
Yep, it's a bit hard to lay it down
Consultation?
specifically, but yes, we're planning on getting to consultation quite early next year. We'll be putting out a general survey we're planning on towards the end of this year. Formal consultation on the actual policy, definitely early next year, as much as we can get away with it.
Fantastic. All right. Would someone like to move the recommendations that we've got before us? Philippa? Charlotte? That the Strategy and Policy Committee accepts the annual review of the off-licence cap under the local alcohol policy and notes that the local alcohol policy will come up to the committee for its substantive review over the next 12 months. Any discussion? Mayor Andrew.
Yeah, it was really just a brief comment around this. I'm pleased that, you know, as a council, that the local alcohol policy cap review comes up. It's a topic that we are across, and I guess what my point is that when I talk to police and those involved in the social sector, and I've just had a forum with had a session with a large group of people in the social sector, is that the three big issues for Wanganui, the three big addiction issues, if you like, are alcohol, drugs, particularly methamphetamine, and gambling. Those three are the root cause of a huge amount of social issues across our district, and indeed across New Zealand, actually. And how we respond to that, I think, is really important. So this goes some way to responding to those three addiction areas. I'm still pondering how we as a district, as a community, respond to addiction issues in general. And I know that Safer Wanganui are playing in that space and doing a great job, but social issues are very hard they're very complex and very, very deep in regard to how we resolve them. So really my comment is really just it's still up for grabs as to how we continue to grapple with this really difficult and complex social issue. So thank you.
Thanks. Andrew? Philippa?
Yeah, thank you, Mayor Andrew. And you will be in those forums, and you would have heard, thank you for those comments, because I think it's important that our community and us hear that from our leader in this community. I mean, we know that alcohol consumption can be absolutely fine. It's, you know, one cigarette is a bad thing, I'm afraid, but one drink of wine, or one to two, depending, and similar with beer is in the right social context, you know, is relatively safe. But there's no, I mean, those three big issues that you've commented on, well, my 18 years of time on the district health board, and actually working in health, and some of my colleagues, when we have asked the medical director of health there, what are the three big issues? What are the three things that keep you awake at night? They've said alcohol, 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 and it's the it is the easy, the very easy availability of it. It is sitting in all our communities. There's an alcohol outlet in most of pretty much in all our, you know, from Central City right out through our communities. And while some of those other substances are of great concern, I guess it's just we come from a rugby drinking beer culture, and that whole thing has got a lot of work to be done. I would really like to, I mean, I guess Councillor Kate asked, but it's really important this review is done well before the election period, that we actually, because we've been trying to deal with this for a while, and it's all very vile and it's great that it's brought up and we go, oh, alcohol, and yep, you know, the CAP's kind of doing its job, but the triggers what are not, well, we're not making enough, and we're not alone, an impact on reducing alcohol harm. And so I'd really implore, you know, particularly with our new portfolio structure, Safe Wanganui, and the support, and you know, it's got an opportunity here, I think, to tackle this issue going forward with this, with the review, and something like, and talking to our MPs, etc., and looking at the possibility around a members' bill, because it's going to take. A council like ours has stood up before, and we can stand up again and lead something like a members' bill to Parliament. So I really look forward to hearing back in that space. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Rob?
Yeah. Look, I wasn't going to say anything about this, but I really have to, because, you know, I just think that sometimes this local alcohol policy is getting to the ridiculous stage. We're talking about 13 outlets, you know, and as Elise said, like there's 27, the dairies and supermarkets, or the grocery stores as it was described, and supermarkets, they are at least as many, but they probably sell probably 80% of the alcohol that's taken away and consumed off licence, I would guess. If you add online there, we're talking about a minute part of the alcohol scene, you know, with these 13 outlets that you're talking about. So I think we need to get this into perspective when we're talking about a local alcohol policy. Unless we've got some control over dairies and grocery stores, there doesn't seem any point.
Councillor Jenny?
Thank you. It would appear that in the future we may have some control over supermarkets and dairies, etc. Therefore, I would think that it's absolutely critical that we stay in this and that we look at reducing the numbers of off licences in Wanganui. We've already heard about the level of harm that occurs in our community. As Philippa has said, you know, at the hospital, the biggest causes of harm are the three being alcohol, alcohol and alcohol. It's not something small to just flick away with some candid comment about, well, why bother? We've got supermarkets who can do what they like. We need to stay with this. We need to do what we can to support our community with something that is quite a dangerous addiction. So thank you.
Thank you very much for your good work on this, Hannah and Elise. Really appreciate it. The local alcohol policy, or the LAP, is an important, very important piece of work that this council has a proud history of being involved in and influencing to lead to better outcomes for our community. So thank you, and we look forward to next steps. All those in favour of the recommendation up there, please say aye. Against? Carried. Thank you. Item 5.3, legislation and consultation update. Elise, welcome.
Thank you very much. So I think you're very familiar with this paper, the purpose of which is to update you on legislation, consultations, reviews, inquiries and other policy decisions or proposals made by central government which may impact on council or the wider Wanganui district. We've just noted that when we write the report, there's often a lag between writing it and the final meeting date. So a few things have changed or moved on. So I will probably just focus on highlighting those. So the first is the Local Government Electoral Legislation and Māori Wards and Māori Constituencies Amendment Bill. I think you're aware of this change, but there was an update to the bill to remove the ability for councils to not make a decision. So councils who instituted Māori wards during the previous electoral term without a binding poll now have to make an active decision by the 6th of September, fairly soon, to either go for a poll in the next election or to revoke the decision ahead of the election. I imagine that change was to provide certainty for councils who are planning their elections already next year to know what they're looking at. And that hasn't progressed through yet. I think it's probably in that pile of bills going through that Catherine mentioned earlier, but it hasn't yet passed through. So just highlighting that one to you as that has changed. In terms of legislation passed, there's a number of pieces there. I don't think I need to highlight anything in particular. I seem to have doubled up on the Waste Minimisation Waste Disposal Levy Amendment Bill. That may just be of interest to those in the portfolio around waste, that they have broadened the levy to include things like emergency waste, so waste that comes out of, a significant event, waste that causes environmental harm, or the ability to remediate contaminated sites. So it's just broadening it out from, what was previously more about waste minimisation activities. Just thought that might be of interest. Then flipping over in terms of consultations, we have been fairly active as much as we could be during the long-term plan process. So we've attached the different submissions we've done for your information. I will just note the land transport rule because that was of strong interest to our community. So you'll remember that we undertook our bylaw consultation, which was well supported, particularly by schools. We were in the process of going through and having that bylaw adopted. And just before that, the government announced its changes to the rule. So we have put that process on hold while we wait the outcomes of this latest change. The consultation closed on 11 July, so I don't have a forward time frame of when we will have decisions, but we will definitely keep you posted on what the decisions are and then what that means for the changes proposed. We have written to all submitters to inform them about this, and we had quite a few disappointed responses, to be honest, by the schools who felt that they wanted to see these changes brought in, and it's a further delay and uncertainty. So, unfortunately, that's just where we're at. As we know, it was always going to be unclear and uncertain, and at any point, central government can come in and override. So at this point, we're just really waiting to see what happens next. But our submission was really just focused on the imposition of central government on local decision making and the additional costs and that the proposed changes would bring. And just a focus on safety issues, as a lot of the evidence shows that accidents out schools happen outside of drop-off times. So one of the main proposals was to limit it to 8 a.m. to 9:30 and then 2:30 to 4 p.m. So outside of that time, speed limits would have to be variable, so changing, which comes at a lot of additional costs in terms of infrastructure and putting up those electronic changing signs for councils. But the evidence also shows that I think it was the majority of accidents actually happen outside of those hours because schools tend to be hubs for the community. And that evidence, I think Auckland Council put that up in their submission. So anyway, I don't want to labour that. I just wanted to point that out because I know that was
I think you should labour it.
of keen interest. And there was an action on us to write to NZTA to advocate for speed limit reductions around state highways. I've spoken with Damien. He's obviously moved on from the transport role, but that's also on hold, just pending the outcome of the consultation process. However, we also noted that in our submission, that several schools in Wanganui are on state highways, which are obviously managed by NZTA. So, you know, basically, please don't forget about these as well in your process. All right, the next one I will highlight is the upcoming consultations. So moving forward into the future opportunities. So you're probably well aware that the government's put forward a proposal for consultation called Making It Easier to Build Granny Flats. So that's that additional information we've tabled is just a one-pager to give you a nice and easy summary of what it's about, but I'll just go over it very briefly. At a high level, it seeks to amend the Building Act and the Resource Management Act to make it easier to build granny flats. Building consent would no longer be required if the granny flat is up to 60 square metres, and resource consent would only be required in very limited situations. The council's role would simply be to receive notification of the planned build and its completion, but our role beyond keeping record of the granny flat is unclear. So this is really the sticking point for us around the liability and what is the future liability. So it does have some real implications for us, as well as around development contributions and around district planning and building control. So our draft submission makes a number of recommendations just to try and limit those potential risks and the unintended consequences of the proposal. But overall, you know, we as a council, I think our position is really supportive of providing more accommodations that is suitable for people as they age and to live closer to their families. So we understand the principle of this and want to get behind it, but we want to ensure long term it's not going to lead to future issues, past issues we've seen with things like leaky homes going into the future, and you know, unclear liability around for council within who is liable if there's been no consents. Where does that leave things? And not just for council, but for homeowners. So we're seeking your feedback on the submission, which we'll send around after this meeting, and we'd appreciate any feedback via email, and then we'll look to get that signed out before the 11th of August. So there's a bit of time to consider it. I just wanted to give you a high-level flavour of what it's about, and then when you read the submission that pops into your inbox, you've got a bit more context. And I think that's all, other than I am doing a separate piece of work just on tidying up our processes, and one of the processes I'm looking at is this process for getting submissions received. At the moment, the majority of them are circulated by email with approval by email and signed out by delegation by the Mayor, but I'm just talking to some other councils about how they do it, because obviously it's very difficult to get these presented to this committee meeting with the timeframes. So I will report back next S&P meeting on that. For now, we've got the current process in place. Happy to receive questions on any of that.
Thank you. Just in terms of the process for developing and getting feedback on submissions, do you have a sense that it's not working as well as it could?
I think it works fine. It's more about these are your submissions, and I want to feel confident that you as elected members have had sufficient time to input and are in agreement. And I don't think the decision, sometimes it ends in, sometimes it can get to a point where officers are having to make a call either way, and I think ultimately it's your call, and I just want that to be really transparent.
Sure, thank you for that, but I will give you some feedback that I think it's an excellent process, given, you know, the time constraints sometimes and the responsiveness of you to sending drafts and incorporating feedback into the drafts. I'm delighted at the way it works. So.
Oh, okay, well that's really helpful, and in terms of efficiency, I would say it works well in that we don't have to call additional meetings. Many councils actually call special meetings just to approve submissions. So by no means am I suggesting that we add additional layers of bureaucracy or anything like that. No one needs that. I want something that's efficient, but I want to make sure that you've had ample opportunity to review and provide feedback.
Thank you. I think it's great that you're looking to how it can improve, but feedback from one of your EMs, I think you do an admirable job. Questions? Josh?
Yeah, thank you. Just a minor one, and it's about the repeal of the Good Friday and Easter Sunday restricted trading days amendment bill. It says there that council does not have a position on Easter trading. I recall that we did have a policy on it, or has that lapsed?
So we didn't have a formal policy. What we essentially had was a statement of non-position. I've worked on that a couple of years ago now, I think. I don't think it was ever a formal policy.
Can we have that checked? Because I recall passing one back in 2017.
I was going to say, I think also there was a 2017 policy, but we haven't changed our position. Is that correct?
Basically, the default is because we've got Easter, we don't have an Easter trading policy, is we don't have Easter trading policy. In 2017, what the council did was they consulted on having a policy, but they decided not to have a policy because they wanted no Easter trading, effectively. So it's a very convoluted way of doing it, but it's because the default of the Act says if you don't have a policy, there's no Easter trading, and we chose not to have a policy, so there's no Easter trading.
No, our
The
policy
is to have no Easter trading.
So to clarify, our policy position from 2017 is that we do not, we are aligned with the legislation, so we do not allow Easter trading.
So we have a policy of not having a policy. Okay.
We have a policy of not deviating from the legislation, from the Act. So if we wanted to deviate from the Act and allow Easter trading, we would then have to put that in motion. And since my understanding is since that 2017 decision, that has remained the same and there hasn't been appetite to look at changing that.
Thank you.
Michael, then Charlotte, then Ross.
Just on that then, so just to clarify, can we, because I didn't know this, can we outrank central government then on all their trading days?
I don't believe so, but you can allow trading on Easter.
Just Easter.
If you choose to do so.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay.
I will come back to you on the other days, but I very much doubt Christmas Day and would be out of your reach. Yeah.
I want all days, yeah. My question actually is about the granny flat. Term granny flat. Is it a small home with all amenities, kitchen, bathroom? It is.
That's my understanding, Justin, if that's correct. You can have a 2-bedroom home, I think, and it's the size. It's the 60 square metres, yes. So what you can fit into that.
So I could put a 12-bedroom, 60 square metre home, and it's totally fine. If there is no building or resource, Glenda's the builder over there, sorry. But if there was no resource and consent at all, does this mean I could put 10 on my property with no questions asked?
I'll let Justin answer the consenting questions.
Slips.
Through the chair, it's tied to the number of principal dwellings you have on the site under the proposal, but effectively for most sites it would mean one per site.
Okay. So abuse isn't going to come suddenly from someone like me going 10, 12-bedroom units on my property. As all I was clarifying.
No, rural does matter.
No, you can't put 12 with 12 bedrooms each under the current proposal. Yeah. It's, I guess, the word granny flat is an interesting choice, but I guess it's trying to show, they talk about it being about allowing the house to be close, together, to allow people to age in place, I think, to live. What was the wording, Justin? Aging.
They refer to aging in place.
Aging in place, yeah.
But while they refer to granny flats, it's small. Think of it more as small dwelling or small dwellings, less than 60 squares, but they've also include accessory buildings in some of the provisions as well. So there are a lot of implications for us with the way that they're proposing to do it, and the way that they're choosing to implement is probably the large part of where officers have made comment, and the draft submission, which will be circulated, basically speaks to that.
Yeah, and just my last point on that. So they're focusing on granny flat for people of older age group. Does that mean they're looking at not allowing commercialization, rentals, that kind of thing?
No. They basically, they speak colloquially as granny flats, but it's a colloquial term, and even MFE and MB are trying to distance themselves from that term because it's not actually accurate. It is I prefer the term minor or ancillary dwelling is a much more appropriate way. It's a small secondary dwelling on a site associated with a principal dwelling. They're also talking about how they deal with other accessory buildings, which might be similar in scale. For example, some of the garages and some of the sheds and stuff like that, as well as something they're also basically asking for feedback on. Cool. All of it has implications
to clarify, anyone could live there and you can rent it, etc. Cool, thank you.
Correct.
Obviously, you'd have to meet the healthy home standards. I think the confusion is the desired outcome is supporting intergenerational living and ageing in place. So that's the desired outcome of this policy, but it's obviously not exclusively for older people. Yeah.
Can we just follow up on this? Justin, you've talked about the mechanism. I think what I've heard from you, it's the mechanism with which government is suggesting this be expedited, putting a minor ancillary dwelling onto a site. Do you want to talk to any of the, a possible alternative to the way that they've suggested this be done?
Through the chair, the government one of the ways they're proposing to do it is through a national policy or national environmental standard. What a national environmental standard has the effect of doing is effectively inserting rules into our district plan. Now, one of the problems about what that method of doing or implementing this policy approach is that it would have the effect of taking rules that might be appropriate for Tier 1 authority, which is like some of your major metropolitan authorities, and basically applying them to Tier 2 and Tier 3 councils. We're a Tier 3 council. One of those big issues are around things like site coverage and a number of those other things that they are trying to remove rules to facilitate this development and basically make it so that basically anywhere in the country you can basically do it. The problem with that is the implications it will have for us. So, for example, we currently have a 40% building coverage. They're proposing to go up to between 50 and 70. So think double or just under or double what in terms of stormwater allowance. Think just in terms of your bulk in relation to boundary. Lots of things like that are all implications that we have. But it's not just the minor household units. It's what does it mean for any of the other development on that site? Because if you can have a minor dwelling following those rules, why can't you do another type of activity on that site? So it has some quite significant impacts for us. The recommendation in terms of one of the ways that we could implement the policy or objectives, probably with less effect on Tier 3 councils, would be to make it a requirement under the National Policy Statement, which basically directs councils to allow a certain activity. Now, that would allow us to still keep our development control, our appropriate development controls for us without adversely, while still achieving the policy objective that they're looking for, to make minor dwellings easier, which we're generally in line with.
Okay. Thank you. Charlotte.
Thank you. Hey, I just wanted a little bit of further clarification on the speed limit changes. So you were talking about majority of accidents happening outside of schools, outside of those school hours, correct? So I guess my question is around, if we were going to be charging ahead with the proposed changes, presumably that would have incorporated some of those electronic signpostings. However, did you suggest that that might not be the best way to go if indeed most of the accidents happen outside of those times?
I can't comment on what will happen because this closed for consultation on the 11th of July and I'm unsure what the final decision will be. But currently, as it was drafted for proposal, it stated roads outside school gates will need variable speed limits during drop-off and pick-up times by 31st of December 2027. So, as I'm not a road engineer, I'm not sure of all the ways in which you can achieve that, but I'm relatively familiar, as you probably all are, with the electronic signs, and I imagine that's probably the easiest way to achieve it so that they can change, but there may be other ways to achieve that. However, this rule overrides our local decision making, so we would, if this goes forward, we will have to follow that rule. We will have to have variable speed limits.
Yeah, that didn't quite answer my question though. I just wanted clarification on the statistics.
Oh, sorry, I thought you were more asking about the process. I don't have it at my fingertips unless it's in our consultation, but I can send it around. I believe it was from Auckland Council who provided evidence that the majority of accidents outside schools happen outside of those pick-up and drop-off hours. So
say, for example, on weekends.
Yeah, so limiting just to weekdays 9 a.m. and 2:30 to 4 doesn't actually achieve the safety outcomes that our community has asked for and many communities across the country have been asking for. I'll have a quick read in here. But yeah,
I mean, that answers my question. That does give me the clarification that I was seeking. So yeah, I guess a little bit more time in teasing out of that is helpful.
Yes, sorry, it is here in our submission. Auckland Council has stated that road deaths in Auckland have fallen 30% where lower speed limits have been in place, and that 85%, so it's more than a majority, a significant majority, 85% of crashes near schools happen outside the normal drop-off and pick-up times.
Near schools, not outside them.
Yeah, well, we'd have to look into what that means, but yeah, that was certainly part of their submission and something that we picked up as many of the schools and the communities who lived around the schools supported the speed limit reductions, as there was a wider benefit to just being around school times. So they saw a wider benefit to, as you said, on weekends, not having people hooning around their neighbourhood.
Thanks.
Thank you. Ross.
Thank you. Again, I apologise for my throat. 2 questions. Justin, smaller dwellings, because I find the other term a little bit derogatory. Should that legislation go through, in order to incentivise infill of properties that could have them, would it require officers to come to councillors with the idea to incentivise this infill of smaller dwellings, or would it be more likely that a councillor would come with a motion seeking incentivising?
It's not the incentivisation side of it's not really our space. It might be something to discuss with or relation to the broader house or the housing side of things.
Okay?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Can we take that conversation offline?
No, that's
Ross?
fine.
We can
I
talk
saw that
about it.
coming that way. And the second question, and it's probably to the chair, is in relation to a decision that's coming to council in the next 4 weeks or so on Māori wards, where we are being forced to make a decision, which I find appalling, but we have to make a decision to rescind or go to the poll. That's our decision to make. The government's forced on us. Is there in discussion the possibility or time for us to poll or survey our community so that we have some sense of their attitude on this matter? Is that going to happen? Is that an opportunity that we can look at?
I'll get Elise just to remind us of what's already happened, if that's all right, in terms of engaging with the community about this issue.
Yes. I mean, I think you're aware of the timeline and that you made the decision last year around Māori wards, and there was a full consultation and engagement process on that. And we've now got our representation review well underway, and that closes on Sunday, and then you'll have hearings on that as well. The legislation, the amendment, doesn't require a special consultative process or a consultation process. It's very open around what any further engagement might look like. Without speaking out of turn, I would suggest that it be given the significantly limited time frame now, that because we're not sure even when the legislation will pass, that it would be best to focus that on iwi hapu engagement at this point. I think trying to undertake further community engagement would be extremely difficult, and given the level of engagement already, I wouldn't be recommending that. But again, that's not my position to say. Ultimately, it will be, as you said, Ross, your decision, and you'll have various information and evidence points that you can refer to up to now as well.
Yeah, and I would concur with what Elise is saying. I'm not sure that there would be sufficient added value to the decisions we need to make in the time allowed.
And I thank the chair. I had to respond to some residents asking me about it, so I've represented that. I appreciate your response.
Right, thank you. Rob, then Glenda.
A couple of questions. First of all, with that requirement to make that decision for Maori wards, has there been a date? I know September the 6th has got to be done by, but I think we've probably only got one council meeting before then. So is it going to be at a council meeting?
I believe it will be at the 3rd of September council meeting, assuming this legislation passes. Keep in mind it still hasn't passed, so assuming it goes through, I think you've got it penciled in for then.
Okay. The other question, with the granny flat and the development contributions, now, if you've already got a 4-bedroom house and you put a granny flat on, I presume that's going to incur a $14,250 fee.
Through the chair, in terms of development contributions, the normal policy will apply. So you basically charged based on if you've got 4 bedrooms currently, that's equivalent to 1 Huey. So then you'd end up with however many additional bedrooms you had in your granny or in your minor dwelling. That's what you would pay development contributions on.
Okay. So a granny flat's going to be 1 bedroom. So
then you would pay 0.25 of a Huey for the development contributions, or 25% of the for main dwelling.
Okay. 3,000.
Thank you, Linda.
Thank you. Just carrying on the conversation with the smaller dwellings. If the legislation goes through, is there room for council to make regional regulations with regards to our liability, given that no consents would be required? Is there room in there for us to do that?
No, because
No.
sorry, do you want? You're talking about the building consent process.
Yeah, if there's no consents required,
And that's one of our concerns, is that the LBP process isn't fully developed, and that has some quite major implications for us and around liability and where does that liability sit if something goes wrong. If we're just receiving an application or receiving documentation, if we don't look at it and someone says that we should have, does that or those are some of the things that we're looking for clarification around some of that process.
okay, thanks.
I just realised, apologies, I just wanted to point out two small things in our submission to draw your attention to, which is the cost of building consent is estimated to make up only 0.75 to 1.5% of the total cost of building smaller dwellings. Thank you, Ross. We will modify our language on this. And with a resource consent, that's estimated at $1,500, so that's 0.6% of the total costs. And we've also noted in our submission, with regard to building consent applications, many of these are delayed. So in our last financial year, we received 782 building consent applications, of which 2/3 of those required further requests for information. So our average time to grant a building consent was 12 days, but with the delayed time to then go and get more information where consent applications didn't have sufficient information, that's actually where the delay is. So it's not the council delaying the processing, it's the consents the consents having deficiencies in them when they're submitted. So we just want to point that out, that we don't believe that this proposal is really getting to the problem definition, and that the problem isn't really the delay in consenting or the costs. So just to add that to the thinking. Yes, that's about building consents, and in most cases, resource consent isn't required for smaller dwellings.
Right. Good, thank you for that clarification. Good discussion, thank you. We have a recommendation that the Strategy and Policy Committee receive the report, legislation and consultation update. February
2024.
Yeah, should be July 2024.
Sorry.
All good. All right. Jenny has moved that. Got a Glenda as second. Any discussion? Michael?
Oh, just me. I was quite excited about all those points, and just a few things I want to point out. Ease of trading, to me, I think everyone should be free to open whenever they see fit. To be able to compete in a global market, you shouldn't be closed. I find it's quite strange. How fast you go. The speed limits. I must admit, I've been driving to St Anne's quite frequently, and since they put the speed humps, I know everyone hates speed humps, but I love these speed humps because it reminds me every single day to drive much, much slower. So I do wonder if we can't do certain avenues that we put speed humps everywhere, because they're great. Michael loses his election now. So my third point is around minor dwellings. Now, I was having a bit of fun. I have designed a 5-bedroom minor dwelling. IP can be given to Glenda, and I like to have 10% of the profit there. But I do want to expand on this. I do really like this idea, because we've been raising it here for a long time. How do we help the 3,000 people who have got ability to have minor dwellings on their property but can't afford all the resource and building consents, all the houses? I do disagree that the average cost is $250,000. I think we can do a lot better for that. And how can we facilitate that to put minor dwellings to increase our rental capacity? Minor dwellings are not just some tiny shed in the back of your garden. They can look and feel really nice. 60 square meters for 1 or 2 people is actually quite good. So I'm really excited about that. Jokes aside, I think could be a really good area. But I'm looking forward to your feedback from the officers, because you guys do know best, and I'm just designing 5-bedroom minor dwellings. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for the great work. You know, I think we continue to punch above our weight in terms of persuading and influencing, you know, central government of our views, you know, and like I've said before, I'm very proud of the depth that's in our submissions. So thank you for that, and thank you for involving us in the process. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. Thank you. Strategy and Policy Committee Work Programme. Item 5.4, last item for the day.
Okay, thank you very much. So in terms of updates, I'll just highlight a few things in the report. So the LTP response letters have now gone out to all submitters, bar just a handful that we're managing through the Lagoima process. And we're just wanting to make sure whatever we're providing through the Lagoima is lining up, but they're likely going out in the next day or two. So that's been a huge undertaking. For those listening, the emails come from the policy address, so you may need to look out for those or maybe check your junk email in case they've gone to the wrong place. And I'm pleased to report that we have received several email responses which are really positive about the community feeling heard and that their engagement was worthwhile and democracy is working. So I'm going to read one because we all need some positivity. Woohoo, big changes from pre-submission thinking. This bodes well for all those participating to feel like participatory democracy is working, and highlighted, in Wanganui.
Nice.
So thank you to our submitters again, and for those who do provide feedback, I think they don't know how much that really means to us to actually have that come back. So the letter we sent includes information about the rates rebate scheme and the extended rates remission for properties significantly affected by the October 2022 valuation, and other ways in which people can spread their payments over time or other options. So again, the message is please get in touch early with us. And this timing is important as the first rates assessments letters will go out this week. So in terms of other LTP work, the final document has now gone off to the designers. It's been partially designed to get up on the website in early August. As you're aware, we've started an internal review of the long-term plan process. We're gathering feedback to help us improve future cycles. So thank you for those who've done the survey and the feedback coming in, Rob, from your email. So we do want to acknowledge one of the big learnings was just the sheer volume of the long-term plan in terms of how many topics it covered and how many issues. And it was, it was significant. It was 4 or 5 times more from the previous long-term plan, both in terms of questions, topics, submissions. There were 8,000 submission comments to read and more than 50 attachments with a lot of detail on those as well. So I just want to acknowledge that it was a lot and we're well aware of this learning, but I also know there was a keenness that we turn over every stone and we do every effort we can, and keep in mind that it's a long-term plan, it's a 10-year plan, so it should be broad and it should be covering a lot for our district. But that said, we know that the process wasn't perfect and we do hope to improve for the future. In terms of all of those different issues that I talked about, that there's quite a lot in the LTP and there were quite a few issues that weren't consultation items. We have an internal process underway where we're capturing those issues and we will ensure that there is follow-up. So I've put a report on for the next S&P meeting where we will give you a bit of an update on how we're dealing with those. But one thing I wanted to mention was with the portfolio approach coming in, we will be sending you councillors with portfolios, names of submitters that you may wish to make contact with who have, talked about accessibility or housing issues, so that you can follow through with individual submitters, as I know it can be quite hard to get through the huge volume of those, so we thought that may be helpful for you. For that personal touch as well. Obviously, you're not going to get a stack of 1,600 names, don't worry about that. It's just some key stakeholders that you may want to catch up with in your own time. So, moving forward from the long-term plan, a life after long-term plan, as you'll see, there's a big long list of things that we need to get on with, and one of the big things that I have added to the list is the trade waste bylaw. So this is a very important bylaw to ensure that trade waste entering the wastewater treatment plant meets design, performance and discharge consent conditions, and this will need to be reviewed by June, actually needs to be completely updated by June next year. So again, a pre-election big piece of work. Obviously, as per Catherine's excellent presentation, you're well aware of all of the moving parts with Three Waters. So that does leave us in a little bit of uncertainty around if we are staying locally or going regionally. For now, we will just proceed as we are on current situation, and then obviously we'll need to adapt that if the situation changes. There is some time allowed within our time frame to make that change, but for now we will proceed as though it is a district-wide bylaw. Our freedom camping bylaw, we've also committed to have that reviewed prior to this training finishing up as well. So we've started, we're about to kickstart the research phase next month for that. And we've also started work on the community leases policy. That's well out of date, and that's around where community groups lease land or buildings from council. So just trying to make sure we've got a fair, equitable approach, as well as making it more transparent about what council is doing and how it is providing subsidies. In a lot of cases, I think it's 90% subsidies on leases. So we're hoping to get that done by the end of this year. It doesn't have a legislative time frame, but it's more about for our community groups so they can have certainty of the way forward. Otherwise, I think I've mentioned those two new items on reporting back on LTP, how we're processing that, and the LTP review. That's it. Thank you.
Elise. Charlotte has a question.
Yeah, thank you. In regards to the community lease policy, is there any scope for that to include help me out here, the port?
Okay, so properties owned by the port, how would they be impacted by the community leases policy?
Is there scope for it to include oversight over that as well?
I'm going to say I don't think it's that broad, and I don't think that's its purpose, but I will check that for you and come back.
Can I suggest that it needs to?
That may be part of the review.
Yes.
Okay, I will discuss it with the property team. Yeah, I don't feel I can. I can answer that, but currently it's targeted at community groups who are leasing land or buildings. So you have a musicians club and other organisations and groups, surf club, etc., who are. That's who it's targeted at present.
At least the problem is that some buildings rented by community groups are part of the harbour portfolio.
Oh, okay.
So it needs to contemplate, our policy needs to contemplate what happens in those spaces.
Oh, okay. I mean, it may well cover that. Sorry, I just can't answer right now.
That's okay. Yeah.
Okay, I'll come back.
And I mean, this is a conversation that can continue offline, but just flagging that it does need to include that level of scope.
Okay,
thanks.
I'll pass the feedback on.
Thank you. Any other questions? I'm particularly interested in how this item, and you've alluded to it, Elise, about report back on strategic LTP items, just how that's going to evolve. And it could be that it might be an ongoing issue for a wee while as we determine what happens with each of those pieces of work or suggestions come from the community. Because just because they didn't make the cut this time doesn't mean that they should die in the water, as it were. It could be that they need to find another home or another process to remain relevant and be considered
is I guess where I'm coming from. Yeah? Yeah. All right. No other questions? All right, thank you very much, Elise, for your good work. We have a recommendation that the Security and Policy Committee receive the report, strategy and... Sorry? What did I say?
You said security.
Strategy and Policy. Great, thank you. Strategy and Policy Committee, Work Programme 2024. Do we have a mover and a seconder? Josh, thank you so much. And Charlotte's going to second that. Is there any discussion? No? All right, we'll move the recommendation. All those in favour, please say aye. Those against, carried. Thank you very much for your attendance today, your contribution and participation. Good discussions. And we will close the meeting with a karakia that Julian's going to offer for us. Thank you.
Certainly, karakia wakamutanga o tēnei hui hui. E oha ki runga ki a ranganui, e oha ki raro ki a papatuanuku, wakatairanga, te kupu, te kōrero, te mahi. Ki te pau o te ware, he taonga he mahi a muri, ki puta ki te whai au, ki te ao marama, haumie, hui e, taiki e. Kia ora tātou.
Kia ora. Thanks, everybody.